In the harsh Arizona desert of the 1880s, an outcast, Apache mother and her 3 newborn daughters face a life-threatening struggle. One brave rancher offers safety, changing their fate forever. Witness courage, love, and survival in this unforgettable Wild West story. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe now and join us for more thrilling tales. 1880s Arizona territory. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the desert bathed in twilight shadows. The cacti casting long, jagged shapes across the sandy ground. Rancher Jacob Turner was finishing his final round of the north pasture, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The wind whispered through the dry brush, carrying the scent of sage and the faint tang of distant smoke from a neighboring homestead. Jacob was about to turn back toward the ranch house when something unusual caught his eye, a figure staggering toward him across the open desert. At first, he thought it might be a lost traveler, but as the shape grew clearer, he realized it was a woman, hunched over, dragging her feet across the sand as if every step was agony. Clutched tightly to her chest was a small, wriggling bundle wrapped in cloth. Jacob's instincts kicked in. He spurred his horse forward, calling out to the woman, but she seemed unaware of his presence. Her steps were uneven, and with each faltering move, she sank closer to the ground. By the time Jacob reached her, she collapsed entirely, the bundle slipping from her arms to the sand. Without hesitation, Jacob dismounted and rushed to her side, kneeling in the dirt. He could see her skin glistening with sweat, her breathing shallow, and the faint signs of blood matted in her hair. Carefully, he lifted the bundle, revealing 3 tiny newborn girls, their delicate bodies trembling in the torn blanket. The babies were crying softly, their tiny hands clutching at the air, fragile and perfect despite the harshness of the world that had already tried to harm them. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing a mix of exhaustion, fear, and something else, hope. Fragile and tentative. "Please, help them," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the evening wind. Jacob quickly wrapped the babies in his coat, then gently lifted her into his arms. Her body was light yet fragile, and he could feel the warmth of life clinging stubbornly to her despite her weakened state. He murmured reassurances, even as he recognized the urgency of the situation. The ranch house was still a short ride away, and he urged his horse onward, every second feeling like an eternity. As they reached the porch, Jacob set the woman down carefully. The porch lanterns cast a warm glow over the rough wooden boards, and he guided her inside, brushing away loose strands of her dark hair from her face. He placed the newborns on a table near the stove, where he had already stoked a small fire to provide warmth. The infants' cries echoed faintly against the wooden walls, a stark reminder of their vulnerability. Nayeli, the woman, tried to speak again, but her strength was fading, and she slumped back onto a chair, closing her eyes for a moment. Jacob grabbed a clean cloth and began tending to her wounds, gently cleaning the cuts and bruises she had sustained during her long trek across the desert. Between shallow breaths, she whispered the story of her punishment. Her tribe had rejected her for bringing daughters into the world instead of sons, branding her an outcast and casting her into the unforgiving desert. Every word weighed heavily on Jacob's heart. He had heard of such harsh traditions before, but seeing the human cost, the tears, the exhaustion, and the silent strength in her eyes made it real in a way no story could. He understood then that this woman's survival depended entirely on his mercy and determination. "You're safe now," he told her, his voice firm yet gentle. "No one will hurt you again, not while you're under my roof." The words seemed to reach her, consciousness just enough for a faint nod, her lips curling slightly in a gesture of fragile gratitude, before she drifted back into unconsciousness. Jacob spent the night moving between the stove and the small cot he had prepared for Nayeli. The infants were tiny and fragile, but each breath they took was a testament to their resilience. Jacob wrapped them securely in blankets, murmuring quietly to them as he rocked them gently. He checked the fire constantly, making sure it wouldn't go out, and ensured that Nayeli remained warm. He had expected to find a lost traveler in need of rest, perhaps a simple story of survival in the desert, but this was more than that. He had been entrusted with the lives of 4 individuals, a responsibility heavier than he had ever carried before. His mind wandered as he considered the implications, not only of protecting them physically, but of providing safety in a world that was so often cruel. Outside, the desert night hummed with life. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind carried the faint scent of dry earth and sagebrush. But inside the small ranch house, warmth and light created a haven. Jacob could hear the faint murmurs of Nayeli in her sleep, the baby's soft cries punctuating the quiet moments, and he felt an unfamiliar sense of purpose settling over him. This night would be remembered, not for the harshness of the desert or the cruelty of human judgment, but for the small acts of care and courage that could change lives forever. Morning light crept through the thin curtains, casting long shadows across the room. Jacob had stayed awake most of the night, tending to both Nayeli and the babies. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. Protecting an outcast woman and her 3 daughters in the 1880s Arizona territory would be fraught with danger. But as he watched Nayeli stir, slowly opening her eyes to see the firelight and the table where her babies lay, Jacob felt a quiet determination. These children and their mother were now under his protection, and he would face any challenge to ensure their safety. In that moment, Jacob Turner understood something profound. Rescue was not just an act of charity. It was the beginning of responsibility, of forging a family where none had existed, and of carving hope out of a harsh, unrelenting land. The night had begun as a simple ride across the pasture, but it had ended in the quiet miracles of survival, courage, and human compassion. Jacob knew he would never forget the fragile weight of the 3 infants in his arms, nor the resilient gaze of Nayeli, whose life and the lives of her daughters now intertwined with his own. He had saved them, yes, but in doing so, he had also found a deeper purpose, one that would shape the days, months, and years to come. As the first rays of sunlight painted the desert in hues of gold and rose, Jacob allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. This was only the beginning of a story that would test every ounce of courage, kindness, and love he possessed. Morning light filtered softly through the thin curtains, painting the interior of the small ranch house in warm shades of gold. Nayeli stirred slowly, the scent of fresh coffee reaching her senses before her eyes fully opened. The gentle murmur of Jacob's voice reassured her even before she could fully comprehend it. She blinked against the light, catching sight of her 3 daughters, nestled safely in blankets on the table by the stove. Their tiny cries, a mix of hunger and curiosity, brought a surge of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. It was strange, this feeling of safety, of having a space where she and her children could exist without fear. For so long, the desert had been both prison and executioner, and the world had offered nothing but cruelty. Yet here, in this modest ranch house, there was warmth, protection, and even kindness, a concept almost foreign to her after the harsh punishment from her tribe. Jacob moved around the room with a quiet efficiency, tending to the morning chores while occasionally glancing at Nayeli with a calm intensity that made her pulse quicken. He poured her a cup of steaming coffee and set it carefully in front of her, his eyes soft but unwavering. "Drink this. It'll help with the pain and exhaustion," he said gently, his tone carrying authority yet deep respect. She nodded, surprised by his attentiveness, and sipped slowly, allowing the warmth to soothe her body. Despite the small gesture, it felt monumental to her, a simple act of care she hadn't experienced in a long time. The realization of being treated with dignity, of being allowed to exist without judgment, settled deep in her chest like a fragile flame fighting to grow. Jacob introduced Nayeli to his ranch crew, a small but dependable group of men who had worked with him for years. Their initial curiosity softened into acceptance as Jacob explained the situation. "She's under my protection," he told them firmly. "No one is to harm her or interfere with her life here. She and her children are safe." The men nodded respectfully, understanding both Jacob's authority and the gravity of the situation. They quietly promised to guard her identity, to ensure no one from the outside could threaten her or her daughters. The unspoken solidarity of the ranch crew gave Nayeli a strange, almost surreal comfort. She had spent weeks hiding, moving silently through hostile lands, always watching for danger. Now she could finally let herself breathe without fear of discovery. Days passed, and Nayeli found herself slowly acclimating to ranch life. The tasks were physically demanding, but she welcomed them, finding solace in routines and responsibilities. She proved herself skilled with horses, her hands steady and confident, even with animals larger and wilder than she had ever handled. She mended fences, fed livestock, and learned the rhythms of the land that Jacob had so intimately known. Though she was exhausted, each day brought a sense of purpose, a tangible measure of contribution that she had never experienced in the wilderness. She discovered strength in her own abilities, pride in her work, and a quiet satisfaction in seeing the ranch flourish under her care. Jacob watched her silently, often catching himself staring longer than he intended. There was something about her, resilience that captivated him, the way she moved with quiet confidence, the way her eyes held a blend of sorrow and unyielding courage. It was not just admiration, it was an awareness that she had survived horrors he could not fully comprehend. And yet she continued to care for her daughters, for him, and for the land. Nayeli, in turn, noticed his attention and the subtle ways he ensured her comfort. Extra blankets for the babies, fresh water for her chores, a patient ear whenever she tried to speak about her past. Slowly, a delicate bond formed between them, built on trust, shared labor, and mutual respect. The ranch offered small comforts that she had long been denied. She could hear the soft rhythm of the stove warming the house, the quiet murmur of animals outside, and the occasional whistle of wind through the cacti. Nights were no longer spent shivering in fear or scanning the horizon for potential threats. Instead, she could nurse her daughters, cradle them in warmth, and let the terror of her past fade, if only slightly, with each breath. The knowledge that Jacob had pledged, his protection, created a buffer against the world's cruelty. Each night, as the babies slept snugly in blankets and the fire crackled softly, Nayeli allowed herself a fleeting thought. Perhaps life could be different. Perhaps survival was not the only goal. Perhaps she could finally hope. Jacob, too, felt the weight of responsibility. But it was not oppressive, it was grounding. He had faced danger on the frontier countless times. Nothing had required such careful vigilance, such unyielding commitment, as ensuring the safety of Nayeli and her children. He taught her simple routines of ranch life, showed her how to read the weather, handle livestock, and plan meals for the crew. There was patience in his instruction, but also an undercurrent of protection that spoke volumes. The desert might have tried to break her, but here in this unexpected home, he would ensure she never faced it alone again. Over weeks, subtle changes became apparent. Nayeli began to smile more often. Her voice grew stronger, and the tension in her body eased as routines solidified. The babies thrived, their cries turning into coos and giggles as they grew stronger under her care. She developed a quiet camaraderie with the ranch crew, earning their respect through skill and steady composure. Jacob watched these transformations with a mix of pride and admiration, realizing that he was witnessing not just survival, but rebirth. Nayeli had been forged by hardship, but the ranch was now giving her a chance to grow, to heal, and perhaps to love. It was in these simple, shared moments that their connection deepened. A touch of hands while passing a bundle of hay, a quiet word of encouragement when one of the babies cried, a glance exchanged in understanding as the sun dipped behind distant mesas, each act small yet meaningful. The desert that had once been her enemy now seemed distant, almost like a bad dream she was waking from. In Jacob, she found safety, and in herself a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they began to shape a life that neither had expected, built from resilience, trust, and an unspoken bond that hinted at something more profound than mere gratitude. The vast, arid landscape outside remained unchanged, still as harsh and unforgiving as ever. But inside the ranch, warmth, light, and hope had taken root. Nayeli's story, once marked by exile and sorrow, was beginning anew, threaded with possibility, care, and perhaps even love. Here, among the quiet rhythms of the ranch, and the steadfast presence of a man who had risked everything for her and her daughters, she realized something extraordinary. Life could still be gentle, and the future could still hold promise. The desert had tried to break her, but on this ranch, in this unexpected man's care, she was free to live, to nurture, and to hope once more.